Okay, quick music disclaimer here. I do not own the rights to this music, which belongs to the rightful owner, who is the intoxicating mind of Dr. Frankenstein. So he made my intro and my outro, and I hope you guys enjoy. Check them out on Spotify and YouTube, and no copyright infringement is intended. Have a good day.
A clear choice of good versus evil, of right versus wrong.
Twisted Tales.
Due to some violent content, parental discretion is advised.
Warning, quick disclaimer for today's episode. We'll be discussing things about pedophilia, child murder, cannibalism, and sexual crimes against children. If this is too much for you to handle, take care, and we'll see you in the next episode.
Yay! Okay, welcome back to Twisted Tales, folks. So let's continue on with Albert fucking Fish. Now, I believe when we left off, he was sending some letters to Mrs. Shaw. So let's get into that here. And we'll just continue on with that, and this will be the last part of Albert Fish. So the letters that he was sending to this woman were just very fucking vile, weird, and whatnot. I mean, Fish was a messed up individual, right? So that woman was Grace E. Shaw. Now, she lived in Little Neck. This is a neighborhood in Long Island, New York, and this is founded by George Douglas. The place has like a population of over 17,000. Now, the neighborhood is composed of two main sections. So Little Neck is generally used to refer to the area east of Marathon Parkway and or north of Northern Boulevard, while Douglastown is like the rest of the neighborhood kind of thing, right? So it's like smack dab in the middle type deal. So I'll just give you a little bit of detail about the residents and stuff like that. Now, Little Neck, like the first residents of the area were the Mattancock Native Americans. So they were sustained by the seafood up in Little Neck Bay. Now, early Dutch settlers were drawn to the area by like rich land, abundant fishing, and this was mostly in the 17th century here. That would be like when like European settlers and everything became arriving in the area, and it was mostly, for the fishing and conveniently located harbor. So this woman that he sent a bunch of letters to, she just held on to them because obviously she thought that he was a fucking nutbag. So I'll give a little bit of details on like some of the letters here. And he signed off on each letter as Robert E. Hayden. So the first letter, this was September 30th of 1934. He wrote to her about having a son who was half invalid, and kind of means like a person that's weak or disabled by illness or some type of injury. So he said that he was a director in Hollywood movies, and he wanted somebody to pay for his son's care while he was working and stuff. Now, his son that he called Bobby would sometimes go into spells because of a fall that he had as a young kid. He told her that everything has grown but his brain. He's adult, all that, right? And that he wanted her to take care of him. And if he gave her any shit, she was to whip him. You know what I mean? Like, if he had any trouble, just punch the kid, right? Now, the next letter was October 2nd of 1934. Now, he was going on, like, asking her if she was a widow, would she consider marriage? She asked if her daughter would be staying in the home and everything, right? And would also ask her if she would take part in, like, stripping his son naked, whip him. And, yeah, crazy shit, right? But she did reply back to him, right? I mean, obviously he thought, well, she's showing interest. She's writing me back, right? And I honestly think that she had like zero interest in doing so. She knew this guy was a fucking handful. I'm sure she just wanted to see what else he would say. Now, the next letter was on October 4th. He talked about how her and her daughter would take care of Bobby. And so he wrote that he was like, well, I feel, partly to blame for his condition and all that, right? Because I wasn't watching him when he fell and all this. And around the end of the letter, Fish had also asked her if she would whip him privately, and he would offer up $100 to do this. On October 7th, that was the next letter. So in this letter, Fish had mentioned being called away on business, and he wanted to drop Bobby off to her, and he wanted to pay her several weeks in advance for like taking care of him, right? But he also asked her to take care of another friend of his. Now, this was a Mr. James W. Pell, but there was no such man. So he just made him up. So Fish wrote that this dude was in a sanitarium for a period of 21 weeks. He's like, oh, he's paying $100 a week or whatever, right? It'd be cheaper for him to stay with you. I'll pay you and all this. And he told him that this dude's sons were blown to bits in the war and that it fucked with him mentally. Sometimes he said he pretends to be a boy and he requires spankings. And it always goes back to the spankings, eh? And he said, like, when the guy's in water and stuff like that, he gets shortness of breath. He would come to have fits because he doesn't like water and whatnot, right? So this would require correction. And he could not take a bath alone, so he had to be naked and you'd have to bath him and everything. And he ended the note saying, how about my spanking? Do I get it? Ooh, I hope so. And that's fucking weird. I mean, yeah. Monday, October 8th, he wrote back. He said that he had Mr. Pell drive through Little Neck, the little neighborhood there, and he stopped when he seen a policeman and he asked for the woman's address that he was writing. So he said that the two would spend time going up and down the streets trying to find her place. And he also asked about getting spanked in the letters yet again. And if she would spank others that he had asked about, and he would pay them $100 a spanking. But they had to use a hairbrush, extremely hard on them. And the letters that he sent were just in this fashion. Now, eventually, they did meet up from the exchange of letters. This was on October 28th at 2:30 p.m. So the woman actually waited at the bus stop. This was on Glenwood Avenue and Northern Boulevard up in Queens. So they met up. The two would walk to her place. She made up some bullshit here. Oh, my husband has the car. He could return at any point, or he could be gone all day long, right? So this kind of made Fish kind of nervous. So the two got back to the house. Fish actually claimed to be Mr. Pell, and he had his coffee black, and they talked. Now, he brought a package with her. She opened that up, and it contained a length of rope and a letter that was so ghastly that she was taken back by it. She read it, but she kept her composure, right? She kept it cool. So here, she confronted him by saying there was no need to whip him, and that there was no Mr. Hayden at the address that the letters were sent from, because she went over that way, investigated the whole area. And Fish denied it here. He's like, oh yeah, there's an address. We kind of argued a little bit. Now, she said to Fish, or I guess Mr. Pell, that she would only take on Bobby if she spoke to his father and would deal with him only. To which Fish agreed. So he asked for her number, which she wrote down on a piece of paper, and he got up and he left rather quickly. And I'll give this to Mr. Hayden, he said, right? he'll get in touch. And then he left, hurrying down the road, right? So he had some balls showing up at this fucking woman's place pretending to be this Mr. Pell dude, right? Now, several days later, she received another letter from Robert Shaw. It said that Mr. Pell gave me your note. After her being afraid to spank Mr. Pell, he mentioned taking Bobby down to Roanoke to be looked after by another woman here. Now, he made it clear that this would be a colored woman, as Bobby seemed to deal better with the family. He said, "Thank you for the interest that you've shown," and that was it. Now, after this, Grace Shaw made copies of all the notes that he had mailed to her and everything, and she took them to the New York Times. So this was how she came in contact with the old man, she said. And the Times then put her in contact with the postal authorities. An inspector named Kemper was then assigned to the case. Inspector Kemper. So he questioned her as to why she didn't contact them in regarding the first letter and why the hell she would invite him into her home. She had mentioned that she wanted to get to the bottom of this man, even though she didn't care for his awful letters. And the reason that she invited him in was as a way to identify the man, if need be, like in a police lineup or something like that, right? So afterwards, Kemper decided to have her send bait letters to the man and arrange another meeting. Now, some letters got returned to her, as there was no forwarding address, but they did receive a letter back from Hayden at one point. So Hayden accepted a Monday night supper request. He's like, "Yeah, man, I'll bring Bobby, I'll bring Mr. Pell, I'll come myself," right? As Robert Hayden. The letter was written about nothing but sadistic acts that they would all practice together, once together. But when it came time to meet up, Investigator Kemper hid upstairs there. He was waiting up there. And unfortunately, hours passed, and he and the other men that he wrote about didn't show up. So a week later, one last letter had came in from Hayden here. So all this letter did was just bid her farewell. And it was signed, "Ever and forever, your boy." And then that's how the letter ended. There were no more sent because Fish sensed that something was off. So obviously he took precautions, as he was arrested before, over this shit, right? He didn't want to take another chance. But not long after, Fish began reading articles on Fritz Harriman. This is a man believed to have killed hundreds of young boys during the 20s. So he saved all these articles about this man. And this kind of revitalized him, stirring up devious thoughts of like young boys and other such murderers and shit like that. Because he did all of these things too, right? Like he killed kids. Now he started to look really deep into himself and all like the horrific character that he knew he could be and wanted to be. So what he did was wanted to partake in more acts of violence. He moved into a rooming house at 200 East 52nd Street. This is a place with like 40-some rooms. The place had a Greek restaurant. And he spent his time here alone after splitting from his son because of that whole last job thing, right? And it was here that he would stay through the fall of 1934. He always paid his rent in advance, but would sometimes leave for days or maybe a week at a time. It was noticed by like the landlady and stuff, right? He would only return to pick up a check once a month that was for a total of like $30. And this was sent from his son John. Now at one time he had returned and he read a paper. So the paper was the picture of the two sailors and the two women. And then he heard a knock at the door and he answered it. And it was a mailman holding a letter for him. And this was addressed to Mr. Hayden. So he knew that this dude wasn't a mailman, it was a postal inspector, right? Because he was nabbed before by these pricks, right? No, I'm Albert Fish, he responded. Oh, well, I'm looking for Robert E. Hayden. Well, I don't know anybody by that name, said Fish. So the inspector walked into the room. He's like, "You're Robert Hayden, aren't you?" Nah, said Fish. He kind of knew this was a trap, right? And that the letter was fake. So Fish was all like, well, let's go down to the landlady to confirm this. And the man had walked out the door first. Fish just bolted the door behind him, locked it. So if Grace Shaw ever showed up or anything with this dude, a postal inspector, whatever, she could actually identify the man, right? Because he would be fucked. So obviously Fish made a mistake of going to that residence, and he knew that. So what he started to do was quickly pack his things, packed up his dresser, and he went to a shelf and he noticed there was a space between it that contained a bunch of white envelopes. They were actually left by a previous tenant. They weren't Albert Fish's. But these letters or envelopes were actually kind of special. They had this little insignia on the back, like a hexagram with a series of initials. So he sat down at a table with a fresh piece of paper and decided to share a long-kept secret with someone. So here, he then began writing, "Dear Mrs. Budd." So he was now messaging Grace Budd's mother. And yeah, to sit there and write a letter to the mother of the girl that he abducted and killed, that's fucked. But it was this letter here that he laid it all out. He described the whole crime, and he did not hold back any detail whatsoever. And I'm not sure the reason for this, but eventually this would get the police and the family back in the case. Full fucking tilt. Now, on November 11th, 1934, Mr. Budd had called up William King. This was the head investigator on the case, remember? So he handed him the unopened letter. They didn't want to read it, right? And he took it and later read it at the office. He broke the letter seal, and he was very careful not to get his own prints on the letter. So he kind of had a handkerchief with him, right? And folded it up and took it out and everything. Back then, a lot of folk couldn't read. Well, this included Grace Budd's parents, too. So the letter was read for them, right? King had taken it and all that, but we'll get into that later. So he placed a copy of the original telegram that the Budds had given him. And this was the one about him being over on Jersey on business and stuff, and he stopped by in a couple days. And he looked, and they were both identical, so both had been written by the same hand. And by now, this case was going on for 6.5 years now. So King lit a dart. He looked at the letter for the fingerprints, but there were none on there. Fish was very careful with that. But he did notice the hexagram design that was on the envelope. And Fish noticed that too, but what Fish did was partially blacked it out. It's like some pen or whatever, right? He scratched it out so nobody would notice that. Now the emblem was the letters NYPCBA. And this means the New York Private Chauffeurs Benevolent Association. And this is located at 627 Lexington Avenue. So with this clue, King had grabbed his gun, grabbed his coat, and he set out for this exact address. So he spoke to the president of the company. He was like, a little bit taken back by this. He's like, "Oh, what do you mean? You think one of my employees had written this letter?" "I don't know," said King, "but I mean, it's your stationery that was used." And, he gets that, right? So he did become helpful. So the two checked back, all the hires for, the last couple of years. They actually left the office open for King to go do, going through the applications and stuff here. I mean, they were really good about it. So he went back on everything to the year of 1932, and it wasn't until after midnight that he finished his task. He didn't find any signature that was close to being Frank Howard's handwriting, unfortunately. And early the next morning, King reported to Captain Stein. He gave him the letter, and then Captain Stein gave King special permission to work on this alone. So King went back to the president the next day. He spoke to him, a little bit here, a little bit there. And then they gathered up 75 men, asking if any of the men took home like some of the stationery or whatnot. He's like, nobody's going to get arrested or anything like that. It's just going to really aid me on this case that I'm working on. I got to fucking do this case. So King went back into the office and he just waited around. There was a knock at the door. This was a red-haired man that came up here. He was in a chauffeur's uniform. So the man said, you sure I won't lose my job? Because I can't afford to lose my job, man. So this man was Lee Siskowski. So King had asked him, he's like, did you take any letters from here? The guy said, yeah, I figured nobody would miss them, right? Did you give any away? Did you leave them behind somewhere? And then the man took a smoke from King, and he thought for a moment. He's like, I'm not sure there were any more. If there was, they'd be at this old apartment up on Lexington, number 622. So the officer jotted the address down, and the two exchanged phone numbers. He's like, I'll call you if I need anything. So King went to the area. He talked to some store owners and stuff, some people in the area and other tenants. He found out that Lee was actually a decent man. So he spoke to the landlord, and the landlord said that no one had moved in there since Lee moved out, and the door was always locked. So King got the key. He went up and checked the room, but he didn't find any of the company stationery. He referred back to the letters that Mr. Budd had gotten from Mr. Howard, and the letters had an address. This was 409 East 100th Street. But this letter here was from back in 1928. Now, there were a couple people in the neighborhood that had told him to check out another apartment building and talk to a dude named Shapiro. So this Shapiro dude, he was a young man. He used to be a janitor at number 409, I believe. So he said other than him and an old man that lived in there in a few months, but he didn't remember much. So King's like, what old man? But he's just some old man. And the guy said he knew nothing more. So King made a phone call back to Lee. He's like, well, where else could you have left some envelopes at? I really need you to think on this. So he said there could be another place before I was living on Lexington. I stayed at a rooming house at 200 East 52nd. He's like, I might have left some there on a shelf, right? And King went directly there in an unmarked car, and he parked a few blocks down. So he went into the rooming house and he looked up, and he seen the landlady's mailbox here and whatnot. And he went to that apartment, flashed his badge, and he described a man named Frank Howard. So the landlady thought for a second. She's like, sounds like the guy that's up in number 7. Albert Fish, she replied. So he checked the register on the day that this Lee guy moved out of number 7, and when Albert Fish had moved in. The signature on that register was identical to the one that Frank Howard wrote that he had. So both signatures matched. He's like, well, shit. Where's Mr. Fish now? Oh, he moved out about 2 days ago. But he'll be back, she said. He's like, how do you know? Well, he comes back every month for a check that I hold for him, and he used it as part of his rent pay. So King thanked her. He asked her, not to mention any of this, and to call him if Fish returns for his check. Now, this check came from the Civilian Conservation Corps. And King went to this place, actually. He found out that the letter was sent to Anna Collins first. This was the older sister of Albert Jr. But she could no longer receive the checks due to being on home relief. Well, there was this home relief program, I guess, that was going on. And it would discontinue if she kept it in her name. So it was switched over to Albert Fish's name. So he contacted the mail carriers in that area and told them like what was going on and all that. And they said that they would give him notice when the next check was sent out. So he checked out Fish's record. He noticed that he was arrested 3 times since he murdered Grace Budd and everything, but he was never convicted on any of the crimes that he committed. He found out about his time that he spent in Bellevue. He also found out that the post office dude's name was Kemper. So he went and seen him. They got to talking. And Kemper had showed him all these crazy notes that he had saved from fucking Robert Hayden and all that. And then King showed him the notes that he sent to Grace Budd, like the Budd family. So out of curiosity, he went back to the New York chauffeur's office to see if there was any returned mail for any reason. So the president of the company gave him a letter that actually had been returned that day. It was marked return to sender. So this was addressed to a one Vincent Burke at the Holland Hotel up in New York City. Now he examined the writing, and it was the same as Albert Fish's and Frank Howard's. So he opened the letter and read it. The letter said, "Dear Sir, I was formerly a member of the Outdoor Club, Tacoma Park, Washington, D.C. A nudist group business took me away. I have traveled a lot, so join up my membership in club. I am located here now permanently and wish to know where you have your nudist meetings and the hours. Signed, James W. Pell." This is the same name that Fish was signing off on the letters to Mrs. Shaw. So now he waited, and the check would be sent to the landlady. So that's all he could wait around for, right? Now, when Fish would arrive for the check, she'd notify King whenever he showed up, and King actually stalked this place out from 4:30 p.m. to 2 a.m. He stood at the outpost here. He stayed in a room at the top of the stairs. He'd work on his reports. He'd make notes. He'd read the notes. You know what I mean? And all the other countless fucking letters that they were sent by like weird other people, right? But some people were trying to help too, so he went through everything. So he spent some time cleaning out his 38. He went to the Swedish grocery store. This was around the corner there. They actually provided him hot meals just for his service. Now, the landlady talked about Fish a little bit. She said that this guy was a recluse who disappeared for days at a time. Now, on the morning of December 12th, the officer stopped out about like 10 a.m. just to call the office, check his messages. And he walked around until noon, watching all these Christmas shoppers and stuff because Christmas was upcoming. So he was going to go grab this watch that he had his eye on and grab some roasted chestnuts and shit from a street vendor. So he went back to his room. He took the wrapping off his pack of cigarettes just so he could have a fresh smoke. As soon as he pulled one out, went to go sit down. And there was a quick knock on the door here. It was the landlady. She told him that Albert Fish was here and that he had been back about a half hour just waiting for his check, so she kind of stalled him a little bit. "Where is he now?" he said. She said, "He's down in number 2, and he hasn't come out yet." So King grabbed his gun, dropped what he was doing, headed down past all the doors until he got to door number 2. He raised his hand, he knocked. "Come in," said a voice. He opened the door and seen this old man with a gray mustache. The old man gave a gesture, come on in. "Are you Albert Fish?" said King. "I am." King showed him his badge. "Well, I'm a police officer, and there's some things that I want to talk to you about." Fish said, well, what about? Letters? Well, that's one thing, he said. You ever write a letter to Vincent Burke at Holland Hotel? And then he took the letter out and handed it to Fish. I wrote this, said Fish. He's like, well, do you know Vincent? No, I don't, he said. I just got his name out of a newspaper because there was some arrests made at a nudist colony up on 96th and Broadway. So King pulled up a chair. He sat next to Fish, just chilling on the bed here. So we asked him about the return address that he used. Fish said it was just this old advertising agency that he used to get mail sent to. Nothing special. So King asked him his age. Fish said 65. He asked him if he was married. He told him that his wife had left him years ago. So they got to conversating about like kids and stuff. Fish was like, yeah, I got 6. He told Fish that he was going to take him down to headquarters for further questioning. All right, Fish said, I'll tell you the truth. So King helped the old man up onto his feet. He got him into his overcoat, and he walked behind him. Now, as they walked down the hallway here, down to the stairwell, once they kind of reached the street door, Fish had twirled around, pulled out a straight razor, and then lunged towards him. He had a razor in each hand. Remember I said he kept fucking knives and shit in his pockets? That's why. So King seen this, he grabbed the old man's wrists, swung him around onto the landing gear, tossed his ass up against a wall. But Fish just held on to these weapons. He fucking couldn't shake them loose from his hands. So King started bashing both wrists against the banister there until they fell to the ground, until he could release them. So then he snapped the cuffs on Fish, he searched him, and when he checked his pockets, he found nothing but random fucking knives and other blades. So they took Fish in a caravan of police cars, and he was in the back of the lead car. And not long after, King had asked him about the ad. So Fish said that he replied to Edward's ad, and it was about a boy who wanted a job on a farm. Then he actually went to the Bud farm about the job, and he offered it to him. He said, I didn't own a farm, said Fish. So why did you go there? I wanted the boy. Edward, he replied. Yes, said Fish. Now what did you want with him? Well, I had it in my mind to kill him. And why did you want to kill him? Why? He thought. I don't know. I didn't even know him, Fish said. I just promised to hire him and his buddy, and that would have been that. I would have got them over there and I would have killed them. So then King asked him about the whole bundle thing, to which Fish had thought for a moment, and he said, oh, my implements of hell. And yeah, all this was like his butcher knife and shit wrapped up in that piece of red and white awning. So he explained where he got them. And then when he first saw Grace, he had decided to take the girl instead of the boy. So he told them the story about how things have changed and, giving her change for the store and getting her to count money and all that, etc., and how he took her. So soon, the cars in the whole, police lineup there, they ended up at the spot where Fish took little Grace Bud. So they had some torches with them, and they hiked up through the icy roads a little bit and through the woods. King said, I want you to take me to the spot that you took Grace Bud. So they walked together, so no one could get lost or anything like that. But it then became really dark. Then they started to rethink this whole thing a moment. And they thought, you know what, let's come to it from the other side of the road. So they got down, went back to the cars, drove up a little bit, and then they pulled up, and then they ended up walking here up to a light of a small farmhouse. So this is a place where Fish knew someone, Now, this dude's last name was Cudney. So, Cudney ended up coming out of the doorway here, smoking a pipe, and he asked Mr. Fish how he'd been. Then he noticed all the police and Fish being tied up in shackles there. "I'm fine, Mr. Cudney. Just fine," he said. "Tell police how long that you've known me." So Buddy was like, about 10 years or so now. "So what's this all about?" Fish just replied, "You'll read it in the papers." And they walked on. So Fish took King's arm, and he walked up the road some more. And by now, Albert Fish was kind of sobbing a little bit, crying tiny little bit. Fish said, "We're getting closer now." Then he began to tell them the story about that day, which we all know. Now, as he was talking, they came upon a pathway. Buddy lit a torch, they followed the curve, and then soon they saw a 2-story frame structure that was Wisteria Cottage. So for a moment, they stopped and stared at it. Fish started down the road there in his shackles towards the place. So King followed him up on the porch. Fish said, "This is where I picked up the empty paint can. This is the area of the yard that she played in, picked flowers. I told her to pick them as I went inside," he said. "And then what? Then I went inside this way." So they all went into the house. It was kind of eerie. Wind was blowing around. The whole place was a wreck, right? So you could hear the wind blowing all through the house. So Fish said, "There's nothing down here. It's upstairs you want," he said. 2 officers stayed downstairs to check shit out. Fish, King, and Captain Stein had went upstairs. Albert Fish walked ahead of them. He got upstairs into the room at the top of the stairs, grabbed a lantern for one of the officers, and he held it by King's face. "This is where it all happened," he said. Fish walked to a place between the 2 windows and went down on his knees. "I came into the room and laid out the canvas, right here," he said. "I unwrapped my implements of hell, and I laid them here." He stood up, and then he smiled. "Then I got undressed. When I was naked, I looked out the window, saw Gracie picking flowers. I opened up the window and called for her to come up. So she asked me when the party was going to start, and I said, 'Soon.' I told her that it was still early, and I told her to come up. And then I stood behind the door. I heard her come into the house. I hid behind here," he said. "I could see her coming up the stairs through the crack of the door. When she got to the top, I jumped out at her. She saw me naked and said, 'I'm going to tell my mama.' Fish then took a few steps into the hallway, and he said, 'She started running back down the stairs, but I grabbed her by her throat and then started choking her,' as he clutched his hands together, kind of, moving back towards the room, and he fell back to the floor. So he was kind of just motioning of what he did. So King said, 'Go on. What happened next?' Albert then began to cry for a moment, and then he smiled. Fish said, 'She scratched and she kicked. I put my knee to her chest and choked her some more to make sure she was dead. I took the 5-gallon empty paint can and put it under her neck. That's when I slit her throat and cut her head off with my knife. I tried to drink the blood, but I vomited.' Now, the reason he drank the blood is because it made him feel powerful, actually. Kind of like making the victim a part of him, and then they would be with him at all times. And then I undressed her. I threw her clothes and stockings into the closet there. I took the knife, and I cut her in half above her navel. I couldn't cut all the way through, though, with the knife. I had to end up using the cleaver. I didn't use the saw at all. I placed the body, legs, and torso behind the door. I put her head on the floor in the corner in front of the large hole at the toilet. There were 2 holes in the toilet, a large and a small. Fish went on saying that there was a board that stuck out from one end of the privy that was kind of clean. I took her shoes and laid them there so they wouldn't be seen by anybody using the toilet that came by. I covered the head up with some old newspaper that was there and laid it on top of another board so it would not go down into the mud. My hands were covered in blood. There was no water in the house, so I wiped them in the grass. I went back into the house, wrapped up my tools, and put them behind the door. I dressed and came out. And it was about 4:10 when I reached Dublin Road. I went back home after that, Fish said. Then I came back about 4 days later. I took the body and legs out from behind the door. The body started to have a bit of an odor. The legs were very stiff. Stiff as a board, he said. I threw them out the window, here onto the lawn. I carried the torso out, picking the legs up, over the lawn and went down to the stone wall. And then Fish kind of pointed that out. They let Fish go outside ahead of everybody here. And then he went and they stood near a huge oak tree that had been stripped of like some of its bark and stuff. This happened from some lightning. So they began to walk a bit. And he said to him, I didn't have the intention on killing the girl. And then King asked him, then why did you buy the tools? To use on her brother. And then what made you use them on Grace? I never could account for it, Fish said. I would have given my life within a half hour after I had done it to restore life to her. And, maybe he was being truthful with that, I don't know, but he ended up killing her, which sucks. The guy's just a fucking lunatic. So, King had given instructions to the officers to go search the outhouse. But unfortunately, there was like this whole cave-in that happened there, and the search had to wait until morning. It was too risky to do at the nighttime. He then followed Fish up the hill to the stone fence. I brought the body out here, he said. I laid the body and the legs, as they would be in life, behind the stone wall. Then I got the head from the outhouse. It was all stiff. The hair was just clotted with blood. I brought the head and placed it with the body. Then Fish had showed them the spot here, where he had everything. He said I left the body here, indicating the place at his feet. And then King said, well, we better go send for some shovels. Chief Stein then ordered 2 men to go back to the Cudney cabin for some tools. Then Fish and King sat down at the stone wall. The officers passed around a pack of smokes, and then 2 officers came back with a shovel and a pickaxe, and then King took both of them. Now they asked where this dude named Hamill was. This guy was pretty strong there. So he ended up coming up. They gave him the tools, and him and King both swung the tools into the frozen ground. So they kept digging and digging, and then began to scrape once they got a little bit deeper. Then one of the officers got down and dug out a child's skull and lifted it into the air. And now with this, there's going to be a big media frenzy after everybody finds out about this. And then they return to the city. Now, the next day, King kind of sat on his bed at the St. Moritz Hotel. This is a luxury hotel located at 50 Central Park South. It's on the east side of 6th Avenue, up in Midtown Manhattan, New York. Now, this was built on the site of the old New York Athletic Club. I'll give you a little facts about this. It opened up in 1930, and today it's actually closed. This happened in 1999. But when it was owned by Millennium Partners. The whole thing had 33 floors. The architect was a man named Emery Roth. He was Hungarian. And they estimated the whole cost of this thing was like $6 million. So this is where King got the hotel. So King sat there eating some food and reading the letter that led him to Albert Fish. Now he had not yet slept since they unearthed the bones from the Wisteria cottage. King took this room so he could run the press conference here and give details on the case finally being solved. So then he walked into a room with tons of reporters and cameras galore. The flashing lights and all the picture taking had begun. "The case is solved," he said. So reporters started asking him if he was now ready to retire. So King said, "When the case first broke, I swore I'd never quit the department until the kidnapper had been brought to justice. Well, I'm wondering now just when I'll retire. And what I'll do, I don't know. It may not be all it's cracked up to be, this whole life of ease," he said. And this whole thing, the whole case, everything took a little over a 6 years, 6.5 search. Now, after this press conference, reporters were calling in, and reports were being phoned in from Westchester County murder site. Civilians were piling up there along with tons of cops, and everybody was just searching for more clues in the daylight around the forest and the cottage. They found 2 of the 3 pieces of his fucking implements of hell, a bloodstained meat cleaver and a saw. And by this time, the Budd family heard the news. Reporters were at their apartment, and the family was kind of pretty unemotional. By now, Mr. Budd heard the reporters asking him, "Hey, tell the kidnapping story just one more time." So then he looked over at a picture of Grace, and then he started in on how it all went down. He started off with, "It seemed all right. He looked like he was a decent enough man. And my girl, she looked real sweet in her confirmation dress. Then he asked to go to the party and everything, right? So she was really happy. We didn't think anything was wrong. We said she could go, but to come home early. And that was the last any of us saw her." So one of the reporters asked him what he thought of Albert Fish. He replied, "So far as the murderer is concerned, all I want is justice to be done." They asked Mrs. Budd the same thing. She said, "Maybe Fish is crazy, but he sure seemed to be the nicest man I'd ever met. I never believed he did Grace any harm until we got the news." She held up a picture of Fish from the paper, and she said, "This man is a dirty bum. I'd give anything to get my hands on him. I hope Mr. Fish gets the chair. He's a murderer and a fiend. Animals like him should be driven off the streets." The reporters asked Mr. Budd if he felt the same way. He glanced over at the picture of his little girl, and he said, "That's all I have left for my sweet girl. Albert Fish, he deserves to die. But I don't know, even when I say that, I get a funny feeling. It hits me on the top of my head when I think about the electric chair. I don't know. I look at his face in the papers, and he doesn't look like a bad man. He even has children of his own that he seems to love very much. It's all too much for me," he said. "You could go crazy just thinking about people, I guess." Now, back to Albert Fish. He was held in a detention pen at Center Street headquarters, awaiting transfer to Tombs, and he didn't sleep that night. Edward and his father, Albert Budd, had to go down to identify Fish as Frank Howard, so that's what they did. At first, Fish had ignored them completely. "Don't you know me?" asked Grace's father. "Yeah, you're Mr. Budd," he replied, totally emotionless. Mr. Budd replied, "And you're the man who came to my home as a guest and took my girl away. It was a horrible thing." And then Edward had lunged at him, shouting, "You took my sister." So police restrained him. Fish spoke up and said, "That's Eddie. It makes my conscience feel better now that you have found Grace. I'm glad I told you everything." And Fish just went to go rest. police had taken away his necktie, his shoelaces, and belt to prevent any sort of suicide attempt. But unfortunately that night, Fish didn't catch any Z's. He spent a lot of time sitting on the edge of the bed, mumbling and rubbing his head for quite some time. He was given food and coffee around 4 a.m., but he didn't touch it. Then they brought Fish to a morning lineup, and he was too short to reach the microphone. He actually had to tiptoe so they could make him repeat some of the Bud confession that he made. And he was later transferred to Tombs Prison, and it was here that Detective King was waiting for him. Sensing Fish was overcome with tons of shit, the two had began to talk. He also gave Fish a writing tablet, some envelopes, and this was just in case he wanted to give more details about, like, the Bud fucking murder or any others. And King asked him about other murders, and Fish said that he didn't know anything about that. King then listed off a few unsolved murders around the area, and Fish said, "You may as well convict me of them all. I've already admitted to a crime that will send me to the electric chair. Why should I refuse to tell you of any other that I committed? There's no greater penalty for two than for one." King visited Fish over the course of the next few weeks, interviewing for hours on end, but Fish denied any involvement in any other murder except Grace's. And for King, this whole thing wasn't done. He wanted to know who Albert Fish was, so he began looking into him. So he started reconstructing every step that he ever took as far back as possible. He rifled through the brown suitcase that Fish had at the rooming house on East 52nd Street. He looked at the strange murder articles that he had, like, clipped from the paper and everything. Some clippings were actually held together with sewing needles. And I'm not sure if they were either clean or the ones that he had shoved up his ass or any other parts of his body. We never know. That's up for you guys to ponder. I put too much thought into that already. Fish had a bunch of saved letters from all the widows that wrote him, a bunch of nudist magazines, books from Edgar Allan Poe. Fish was actually reading, and he was going to write all of his work over and kind of recreate it. There was a tattered black address book that he kept, and it showed his addresses for the past 25 years. So, to kind of fill in the void of, like, some other questions that he had, he started interviewing Albert's children. And he was kind of, like, struck by how poor they were, right? So he actually bought them some food. One of them young kids actually asked this guy to get him a job, and King actually made sure that he got one. Now, because of Fish's arrest, the NYPD phone lines just blew up with calls about incidents involving the old man and others who had experiences with Albert Fish. And though Fish denied involvement with any other murders, he was a suspect in several other ones. There were a bunch of women that brought in, like, obscene letters that they received over the years to see if it was him that wrote them. All kinds of that shit. Police departments from Maine and Nebraska reported a bunch of missing kids that he might have been linked to, just to try and solve these unsolved children cases and some cold cases and stuff. But there were a bunch that were dismissed for lack of documentation, or because Fish was in another place at that time. And there was some woman who told a story that back in 1927 about seeing Fish around after a woman found her young boy cut to shreds, and they actually remember hearing her screams. This young woman was Yetta Abramowitz. Others had rolled in saying that he committed this murder and that murder, and there were 4 separate murders in the same neighborhood at one time there. People swore that Albert Fish was the culprit. What happened was 4 girls were dragged in a dark cellar, and they had been garroted to death with a rope or wire. And they dubbed this dude the Brooklyn Vampire. I mean, it could have been Fish, it could very much be, right? But
there's like a ton of stuff that we don't know about Fish, right? Just the crimes that he was caught for or he later on admitted to, right? So King went back and checked all of his work history, all that, wherever he worked, what places he was at. And everywhere it seemed that Albert Fish went, bodies were left behind. There was Mary O'Connor. She was found mutilated, found in some underbrush up in Massapequa, Long Island. And he met the girl 2 years before while he was working as a janitor at Rockaway Beach Hotel. He was later fired from that job for writing obscene letters to people. So obviously he was writing those letters for some time. Now in February 1927, Fish quit his painting job around the time that Billy Gaffney had disappeared. And that was all that dude could find on Albert Fish. And not long after, they did an excavation of Wisteria Cottage. And it wasn't the graveyard of bodies that people thought it would be. Everyone was like, oh, we're going to find tons of bodies up here, but that wasn't the case. Albert Fish pleaded insanity, and the legal test for insanity in the state of New York at the time was based on an old British law known as McNaughton Rule. So, this kind of goes like this. This asked whether the defendant at the time of the crime in question knew the difference between right and wrong and the nature and quality of his act. And teams of medical researchers and doctors started looking into him. And even all of King's research about Fish, his previous crimes and everything were looked at over and over. All that the DA and everything wanted was the crime against Grace Budd. Now, one time Fish said to King, I wish I had never wrote that letter. I guess it was fate, do me for my wrong. Fish later asked King to speak to the authorities on his behalf, asking that the charge against him be dropped from first-degree murder down to second-degree murder, and in case that failed, King would see about getting a trial in New York instead of Westchester County. The document that was made up, this had showed that Fish provided them with physical evidence that he was cognizant of the wrong he had committed against Grace Budd. There was premeditation for the act, from impersonating a guy called Frank Howard, and purchasing the cleaver, the saw, and the knife. Now, during this, King told press that he felt 10 years younger, and he wasn't going to resign at this time. And on Christmas of 1934, he was awarded the Rhinelander Medal for outstanding service to the city, decorating with the police department medal for his valor, and he was promoted to first-grade detective. And even this New York police department newspaper here gave him the congratulations for getting a menace off the streets. And about 4 days later, after they decorated King, Fish was in jail complaining about stomach issues. So they took him in for x-rays, and the x-rays had shown that he had 27 sewing needles lodged in his lower abdomen and his pelvis. And these were varied from all sizes, small, medium, large, etc. Now many had been in his body for some time, some actually even eroded. It was estimated that it would have taken about 7 years for the needles to reach that point of erosion. Now he mentioned putting one in his scrotum at one time, but he couldn't withstand the pain. Now, he rambled on about putting the needles in other people, especially children, and it wasn't just himself. He then talked to the doctors, and he gave them 5 explanations as to why he did this shit. 1, to relieve pain from a hernia. 2, it gave him a sexual kick. 3, he was punishing himself for what he did to others. 4, voices had told him to purge himself of sin by self-torture, and that's why he shoved the needles in. And 5, he thought that he might kill himself by perforating his intestines and stuff. Now, doctors found Fish was in no immediate dangers because of them, and he would not require any operation for their removal. The ones by his stomach had indicated they were not swallowed, but simply pushed in, and he told them that sometimes he would use a thimble to push them deep inside his body. He told them, "I caused others so much pain. I thought I ought to suffer too." And by now, the trial was fast approaching. So he told his prosecutor he'd rather be executed than live the remainder of his life behind asylum walls.
He also showed a little bit of remorse for Grace Budd's murder. More so, this was just towards like the whole sentencing and shit like that, and not the actual harm that he had caused her. As the trial neared closer, Fish's mind started to become really cloudy. He couldn't even remember the previous day's events and anything, right? And during court, when that came, he declined to take the stand on his own behalf, and he ignored his attorney's pleas that this would greatly enhance his cause. Now, he wrote a note to his attorney the first day of court, stating, "I feel I will be successful. God has more important work for me to do." So during the course of this whole 2-week trial of the state of New York versus Albert Fish, a total of 55 witnesses testified. They showed Grace Budd's skull and a box that contained her bones. Now, this kind of fucked everybody up here, right? Like, nobody was really expecting this, but this trial had no holds barred. Grace Budd's mother, Delia, her son Edward, and his friend Willie also told the story of the day that Frank Howard came and visited their home back in 1928. So the family pointed out and identified Fish as the man who took Grace, while the father, Albert Budd, started to sob uncontrollably. Now, during all this, Fish covered his face either with his hands or this handkerchief that he had for most of the proceedings. And then William King took the stand, and he had everything well prepared for his time in court. Now, this went on for about 4 hours as he talked about the case and the events that led up to the arrest of Albert Fish. And all of this just showed how evil this dude was. But, some people didn't give a fuck. He actually got backlash about how he had beaten Fish into a confession. There was some shit that people were saying about how he was using Albert Fish to further his career and everything, and it was just people are weird about the whole case, I guess. He got all that from the defense, though. Now, Albert's kids took the stand as well. Albert Jr. talked about a time that he saw his father naked in his bedroom. He was jumping up and down and looking at himself, hitting himself with a wooden paddle on the ass. It had nails in it, and blood was dripping down his legs from every time that he hit. He also said his father's eyes looked wild, and they were just crazy looking, and he was also red in color. And John Fish told him of a time back in 1926 that he came home from a movie and heard strange noises up into the next room. Fish was again using this paddle on himself. Well, I guess the cat o' nine tails, he might be specific or whatever. He said, "What are you doing?" Fish quickly dressed, and he said, "Oh, well, I get a kick out of it, for one thing." He's like, "What do you mean?" "A thrill," Albert Fish said. Then he's like, "Well, God told me to do it, right?" Just going on with that God shit. Now, in 1927, Eugene Fish also remembered a tale. They were painting the Royal Palm Apartments up in Bay Ridge. This is a section of Brooklyn. And this was for a dude named Googleman. So his dad was finishing an apartment, and Eugene was finishing the other. So Eugene was using a little bit more heavier paint, so he went back to go get some turpentine back to where his dad was. And when he walked in, his dad was standing naked in the window facing 4th Avenue, pretending to paint the trim on the window using a brush that had no paint on it. Eugene was like, "What's up?" His dad replied, "I'm painting." "How can you paint
with nothing under brush. You're right, said Fish. Why don't you put your overalls on, Dad? And then he went to the closet and put them on. Now the court asked him if he had ever seen his dad with sewing needles. Yeah, back in April of 1928, he said. This was 2 months before he kidnapped Grace. He said he had returned home about 5:30 p.m. He walked into the bedroom and saw his father nude, sticking needles into himself. Fish seen him through his fingers here. He hid his face and he began to cry during court. Eugene said he told him that Christ had told him to do that because he got a message from God. Fish also told him that he had an important mission from God and he was going to be gone soon. So obviously that bigger mission was that little Bud girl. Now, the whole court thing ended up being 1,500 pages of trial transcripts. Physicians looked at Fish to try to see if he was insane or sane, and he didn't know what he was doing at the time of the murder and stuff, right? So he said, but they were going to find out. And sometimes the court had to empty out just the women, because the description of his crimes and sexual acts were way too much for them. A stepdaughter of Fish's took the stand and told about his games, all that, right? But she was he was a good dad. And Fish made mention of being interested in cannibalism here. Now, he read a lot into it with a lot of great pleasure. He was reading stuff about the Perry exhibition. So this is where a couple people killed 3 sailors and ate them. Now, he read about explorers in Africa who were killed by tribes, different shit like that, right? So, obviously, he was boning up in his learning. Fish mentioned the famine in China, where kids were used as meat. Now, they were sold and cut up, and people would buy what they wanted. And then he mentioned the letter he wrote to Grace Budd's mom involving the story China and its famine and all that, and then the murder. Now, all of this stuff had piqued his interest, right? So he had to partake in it because this excited him to no end, right? The whole cannibalism thing just really piqued this guy's interest, right? So he felt it was something that he needed to partake in because this excited him to no end. So I have the letter here from Albert Budd to Grace Budd, and I will read that in its entirety. So it goes. My dear Mrs. Budd, in 1894, a friend of mine shipped as a deckhand on the steamer Tacoma, Captain John Davis. They sailed from San Francisco for Hong Kong, China. On arriving there, he and 2 others went ashore and got drunk, and when they returned, the boat was gone. Now, at that time, there was a famine in China. Meat of any kind was from $1 to $3 a pound. So great was the suffering among the very poor that all the children under 12 were sold for food in order to keep others from starving. A boy or a girl under 14 was not safe in the street. You could go into any shop and ask for a steak, chops, or stew meat. Part of the naked body of a boy or a girl would be brought out, and just what you wanted would be cut from it. A boy or girl's behind, which is the sweetest part of the body, and sold as a veal cutlet, brought the highest price. Now, John stayed there so long that he kind of acquired a taste for human flesh. This was going on for a little bit, I guess. And when he got back to New York, he stole 2 boys. One boy was 7 and the other boy was 11. He took them to his home, stripped them naked, tied them in a closet, then burned everything they had on. Several times every day and night, he spanked them, tortured them, just to make their meat good and tender. Now, Fish wrote about a few other things here. It said, first, he killed the 11-year-old boy because he had the fattest ass, and of course, the most meat on it. Every part of his body was cooked and eaten except the head, bones, and guts. He was roasted in the oven, all of his ass, boiled, broiled, fried, and stewed. And then it was the little boy who was next. So this went on the same way. At that time, I was living at 409 East 100th Street, near Right Side. He told me so often how good human flesh was that I made up my own mind to taste it. On Sunday, June 3rd, 1928, I called on you at 406 West 15th Street, brought you pot cheese, strawberries, and we had lunch. Grace sat in my lap and kissed me. I made up my mind to eat her. On the pretense of taking her to a party, he said she could go. I took her to an empty house in Winchester. I had already picked this out. When we got there, I told her to remain outside. She picked wildflowers. I went upstairs and stripped all my clothes off. I knew if I did not, I would get her blood on them. When all was ready, I went to the window and called her. Then I hid in a closet until she was in the room. When she saw me all naked, she began to cry and tried to run down the stairs. I grabbed her, and she said that she would tell her mama. First, I stripped her naked. How she did kick, bite, and scratch. I choked her to death, then cut her in small pieces so I could take my meat to my rooms, cook it, and eat it. How sweet and tender her little ass was, roasted in the oven. It took me 9 days to eat her entire body. I did not fuck her, though. I could have, had I wished. She died a virgin. Now, he said it took him 9 days to eat her entire body. Well, the parts that he could take with him anyway, right? He lived in an absolute state of excitement and sexual desire. Like, he ate her body during the day, and he had sexual gratification at night, coming over and over to the thought of eating her and reliving the crime itself. He mentioned that he thought of raping young Grace, but he curbed that action by deciding to kill her. It was found that his ideas of murder and eating flesh was associated with the idea of the Holy Communion. And her murder was a religious ritual that God himself told him to accomplish. He received a command to sacrifice a virgin instead of some harlot. Now, at one point here, Fish actually got pissed off at the charge of kidnapping young Grace because mostly, the parents had given him permission to take her. So how could there be any kidnapping, he said. But doctors diagnosed his mental disease as paranoid psychosis characterized by delusional hearing and hallucinations. So, on the subject of him eating human poop, one doctor chimed in and said, "Oh, I know individuals that prominent in society. One individual in particular, that we all know, ate human feces as a side dish with salad." So, I guess this was meaning that Fish wasn't the only one that partook in this act. Still pretty fucking gross, though. Now, there were questions and debates on Fish, like being involved in cannibalism, right? And it was stressed that even though a man might eat human flesh, he could still be considered sane. But they attacked this claim here, even like a few others, him being delusional, his hallucinations. And they even attacked his claims to be delusional and all of his hallucinations, saying that he was using this as a smokescreen to cover the real motive for the crime. And they asserted that there had been no divine command compelling Fish to kill young Grace, and that all of this was simply for his sexual gratification. And even state doctors found that Albert Fish was a deviation from the normal, a murderer and sexual outlaw, but sane, as defined by the penal code. Now, there were some disagreements with this, of course. Everyone has their own viewing on the man, and that's just how it was. Now, a psychiatrist, Wortham, called him a polymorph perverse adult, saying that there was no perversion that he did not practice, and practiced frequently. Now, Dr. Wortham found Fish to be a complex character, a man of some intelligence, shrewd and cunning. And during the trial, Wortham stated that Fish acted upon every recognized sexual abnormality of that day. So, I guess that was everything up to the times. Now, this included a bunch of weird shit. It was self-castration, coprophagia, cunnilingus, exhibitionism, fellatio, fetishism, flagellation, homosexuality, hypereroticism, ineffabulations, pedophilia, picarism, sadism, undonism, and voyeurism. And I'm sure there were others. So Fish told the doctors about the messages sometimes that he heard in his head. He said that they were angels that were talking to him, but nobody really listened to that one. And the media dubbed him as the sinister ghoul, the evil gnome, and thrill vulture in some of their articles. And with this, they went on with the verdict here of this fuckhead. Now, after 5 hours, the jury came back into court and found Fish guilty of the murder of Grace Budd, and he would be sentenced to death by electrocution. And when they announced this, Fish said, "Thank you." And that was it. And he was led away in shackles. Reporters tried to snap pictures, tried to talk to him. Even King had waited outside. Now, the verdict here, once that was read, everybody was just bombarded by the press. And after this whole trial and thing, that cop, Mr. King, and Albert Fish only met one more time. Fish was transferred to Sing Sing Prison's condemned row. So upon talking to King, he began to confess to some other murders and some other botches that he did over his years. So it's said that Fish confessed to the molestation of over 400 children, torture and disfigurement of over 100 victims, and the murder of at least 15 kids over a 20-year period. Now, he also wrote a confession of kidnapping and the murder and cannibalism of Billy Gaffney. That was a kid he stole from the apartments. Now, this was probably, some say this is the most graphically written letter that he wrote, more so than the Grace Budd one. Well, I guess we'll see here. Because this mentions details of all his decapitations and all that, right? And ultimately, Fish did confess to the unspeakable things that he did to Billy Gaffney. So, they'll go as follows. I brought him to the Riker Avenue dumps. There's a house that stands alone, not far from where I took him. I took the boy there, stripped him naked, and tied his hands and feet, and gagged him with a piece of dirty rag that I picked out of the dump. Then I burned his clothes, threw his shoes in the dump. Then I walked back and took the trolley to 59th Street at 2 a.m. and walked from there back home. The next day, about 2 p.m., I took the tools, a good heavy cat o' nine tails, homemade, short handle. I cut one of my belts in half, slit these halves into 6 strips about 8 inches long. I whipped his bare behind till the blood ran from his legs. I cut off his ears, nose, slit his mouth from ear to ear, gouged out his eyes. He was dead then. I stuck the knife in his belly and held my mouth to his body and drank his blood. I picked up 4 old potato sacks and gathered up a pile of stones. And then I cut him up. I had a grip with me. I put his nose, ears, and a few slices of his belly in the grip. Then I cut him through the middle of his body, just below the belly button. And then through his legs, about 2 inches below his behind. I put this in my grip with a lot of paper. I cut off the head, feet, arms, hands, and legs below the knee. I put in sacks weighed with stones. I tied the ends and threw them into pools of slimy water you will see all along the road to North Beach. And during his interview with police, Fish had further confessed, I came home with my meat. I had the front of his body that I liked best, his monkey and Pee-wee, so that means his dick and his balls, and a nice little fat behind to roast in the oven and eat. I made a stew out of his ears and nose, pieces of his face and belly. I put onions, carrots, turnips, celery, salt and pepper on it. It was good. And then I split the cheeks of his behind open, cut off his monkey and his Pee-wee, and washed them first. I put strips of bacon on each cheek of his behind, and then put them in the oven. Then I picked 4 onions, and when the meat had roasted a quarter of the hour, I poured about a pint of water over it for gravy, and then put in the onions. At frequent intervals, I basted his behind with a wooden spoon so the meat would be nice and juicy. In about 2 hours, it was nice and brown, cooked through. I never ate any roast turkey that tasted half as good as his sweet, fat little behind did. I ate every bit of meat in about 4 days. His little monkey was sweet as a nut, but his Pee-wee I could not chew, so I threw it in the toilet. So, Pee-wee meaning his dick, and his fucking, yeah, that's weird. So with this confession, King drove to the Gaffney parents. This is down in Ossining, and this was within 2 hours of him hearing this. So he was actually acquainted with them in his post-investigation here, so it was only right of him to do so. She missed Billy and thought of everything he said and did that day before his disappearance. She was also hospitalized at one time due to grief over this, and this is actually on more than one occasion. Now, they ended up at Sing Sing so she could try and identify Fish. Maybe she had seen him around the neighborhood or something like that, maybe a couple days prior, or. But Fish was totally different by this time, as if the death sentence kind of fucked with his head. During the identification, Fish was just slumped over, and he said, "Leave me alone. Get out of here. Please, leave me alone." And he even had court-appointed counsel trying to calm his ass down because he ended up fucking screaming all this at some point too. So Fish looked at the mother, looked up, and then he quickly put his head down. Now Elizabeth Gaffney then told King, "I've never seen this man before in my life." He's like, "You sure?" And she started crying. And she's like, "Yeah, my Billy is still alive." So she thought, right? And then King read the confession letter that Albert Fish had wrote about her son. And then Fish kind of slumped down. And yeah, he looked like he was a little bit in the dumps. But she heard everything about him taking him down to Riker Avenue dumps. And yeah, some say this confession was actually the most vilest admission from Albert Fish here. Now, the two had left,
and King noticed that even being jailed and on death row, Fish's violence reached a grip that was just beyond any of his victims, right? Like, he fucking destroyed families, sent people into like a spiral of shit, taking their loved ones away and murdering them, plus a lot of other things. Some didn't even know where they went or what happened to them, right? For the remainder of their lives. That's fucking terrible. Fish then later admitted to the murder of Francis McDonald, something that he didn't do during the whole court scene. He kept silent on that, but he later admitted to raping and murdering him. Now, the prisoners found out about the whole Gaffney murder here, and they fucking hated Fish for it, right? They would boo him and swear at him and say they're gonna kill him and everything, right? But, every time they seen him, Fish just didn't let it bother him, right? He just ignored them, and he stuck his head into a Bible. And a few days after this, his attorney got word that his execution had been stayed, and Fish showed no emotion towards this. But over time, he began to pray and cry, and then the date set for the execution was January 16th, 1936. So Fish said, "Going to the chair will be the supreme thrill of my life. My only regret is that my family will have no one to guide them." And on his last day, his last meal was roast chicken, toast, sliced tomatoes, french fries, and a tea. Actually, 3 of his kids came and visited him for over 3 hours there. And a prison barber came and tidied him up, like his mustache, his hair, all of that, kind of just make him look good for his execution, right? His pants were slit up the calves, and at 10:30 p.m., a Protestant chaplain visited him, and they said a prayer and a chorus. This is from the song "Wash Me, and I Shall Be Whiter Than Snow." And I get that this whole procedure, like, it's fucking part of it, right? But honestly, I don't think Fish deserved fucking shit for all the brutal crimes that he committed, right? I mean, against those poor kids and everything, like, fuck, praying to God and everything, what's fucking God gonna do? Nothing. And then he was brought down the last mile by some guards here, and then they sat him in the chair. And his fucking last words were, "I don't even know why I'm here." So then they started to recite some, fucking Bible hymns and all that shit. And the death mask went over his face as he said his prayers, and the switch to the electric chair was thrown, and out came a bunch of smoke from Albert Fish. He is now fucking dead, and he could now hurt no one else. And Fish was actually the oldest man to ever be executed at Sing Sing. Now after this, William King had become renowned for his fame, because it earned him a spot on the fucking investigation of the Red Circle murders and the German-American Bund. Now, King became a speaker at like luncheons here, benefits, all that. He ended up marrying, and then he retired back in 1940, and he lived in Worcester, Massachusetts. And there's that word again. Now, going into business as a gunsmith, and he did that for a while there, and his wife actually passed away some years later. And then the attack on Pearl Harbor hit, and he looked into enlisting, but he was declined because of his ripe age at 60 years old. He then pleaded with the Secretary of the Navy to be allowed back in uniform, and this was later granted, and he was promoted to the rank of lieutenant commander and assigned as a port captain up in St. Thomas, located in the Virgin Islands. Then in 1944, he ended up suffering a coronary seizure and ended up in the Veterans Hospital here up in Rutland, Massachusetts. He died on July 14th. This is just months before the victory of the war, and he was buried in the family plot. Albert Fish. Some say that when he was in the electric chair, it only took 2 jolts before Fish died, creating the rumor here that the apparatus was short-circuited by the needles that Fish had inserted into his body. Now, these rumors were later regarded as untrue, as Fish reportedly died in the same fashion and time frame as any other inmate or anything that was put in the electric chair. Now, some say that Fish is just buried in this unmarked grave somewhere. Some say that's in Sing Sing, and some say that he's up in a grave in Flushing Cemetery, up in Flushing, Queens County, New York, kind of bordering on the, Pigeon Meadow Road between 167th and 168th Street. It's kind of near the edge of a fence here in a large bush. And I'm sure that a ton of people were actually pumped that this guy got executed, and the world was now a better place without him in it. But even with him gone, the world is still an evil place. It has a lot of strange people in it, right? But maybe not as strange as the man they called Albert Fish. And with that, folks, I really hope you guys enjoyed this tale. I know I took a bit to do this and everything, right? And cover it and all that, and I do appreciate you guys listening. So if you want, you can check out my page on Facebook, subscribe to my YouTube channel, Spotify, whatever. And if you podcast, go check out Riverside for all your podcasting needs. So thank you for tuning in to Twisted Tales. I'll have Ted Bundy finished up here sometime this week, and I'll record with the Jake and Josh show, and we'll finish up Gary Plausch. So that'll be that. Good night, folks. Thanks for tuning in to Twisted Tales.
Do you like true crime, serial killers, cryptids, and everything twisted and macabre? Then tune in to the Twisted Tales podcast with host Chris Tell for chilling stories, bone-chilling interviews, and above all, some twisted entertainment. Twisted Tales, available on YouTube and any major podcasting streaming platform. Twisted Tales.